To understand how the Macedonian Empire conquered the ancient world, we must first travel to a time when no one feared Macedon. In the 4th century BC, if you had asked a citizen of Athens, Sparta, or Thebes to name the great powers of Greece, Macedon likely would not have appeared near the top of the list. The southern Greeks viewed the kingdom as a distant frontier, rugged, sparsely populated, and inhabited by people they considered less civilized than themselves. While the great city-states debated philosophy, perfected democracy, and constructed magnificent temples of marble, the Macedonians lived in a land of thick forests, broad plains, and towering mountains, where survival often depended more on strength than on eloquence. Their homeland lay north of Mount Olympus, bordered by the Balkans to the north, Thrace to the east, and the Greek city-states to the south. It was a kingdom blessed with fertile farmland, abundant timber, rich mineral deposits, and excellent pasture for horses. These natural resources would one day fuel an empire, but for centuries, they remained largely untapped, overshadowed by the political and cultural brilliance of southern Greece. Unlike Athens, Macedon was not a democracy. Unlike Sparta, it was not governed by an elite warrior council. Instead, the kingdom was ruled by a hereditary monarchy whose authority depended as much on personal leadership as on tradition. The Macedonian king was expected to lead his warriors into battle, settle disputes among powerful noble families, reward loyalty with land and wealth, and prove his worth through courage. A weak king could quickly lose the support of his nobles, while a strong one could unite the kingdom through force of personality. This made the Macedonian throne one of the most dangerous in the ancient world. Succession was rarely peaceful. Rival branches of the royal family frequently competed for power. Assassinations were not uncommon, and ambitious nobles often viewed the death of a king as an opportunity to advance their own fortunes. The kingdom's history was filled with coups, civil wars, and shifting alliances. Stability depended almost entirely upon the strength of the man who wore the crown. Despite these challenges, the Macedonian kings claimed an ancient and prestigious ancestry. The ruling Argead dynasty traced its origins to the legendary Greek hero Heracles, believing themselves to be descendants of the son of Zeus. According to tradition, their ancestors had migrated north centuries earlier and established a new kingdom among the tribes of Upper Macedonia. Whether this genealogy was historical fact or royal propaganda remains uncertain, but it served an important purpose. It connected the Macedonian monarchy to the heroic myths that all Greeks revered. Yet many Greeks remained unconvinced. To the sophisticated citizens of Athens, the Macedonians seemed provincial. Their dialect differed from the Greek spoken in the south. Their customs appeared rough, and their kings ruled with powers that resembled Eastern monarchs more than the elected leaders of the Greek polis. Influential Athenian politicians frequently dismissed them as barbarians, questioning whether they truly belonged to the Greek world at all. The Macedonians, however, saw themselves differently. Their kings competed in the Olympic Games, a privilege reserved exclusively for Greeks. They worshipped the same gods, celebrated many of the same religious festivals, and proudly connected their royal lineage to Greek mythology. Although their culture developed differently from that of Athens or Sparta, Macedon occupied a unique position, both inside and outside the Greek world. This identity would later allow Philip II and Alexander to present themselves as leaders of all Greece, while simultaneously ruling as powerful monarchs in the Macedonian tradition. For much of its early history, however, Macedon struggled simply to survive. The kingdom stood at the crossroads of numerous hostile peoples. To the east lived the Thracians, fierce tribal warriors who frequently raided Macedonian territory. To the northwest dwelled the Illyrians, perhaps the kingdom's most dangerous enemies, whose invasions repeatedly devastated Macedonian lands and killed several of its kings. To the north were the Paeonians, another collection of tribal peoples eager to exploit any sign of weakness. At the same time, the southern frontier remained vulnerable to interference from the Greek city-states, which often involved themselves in Macedonian politics whenever it suited their interests. Surrounded by rivals on nearly every border, Macedon spent generations fighting simply to preserve its independence. These constant conflicts shaped the character of the kingdom. Macedonian society became deeply militarized long before Philip II introduced his famous reforms. Noble families measured their status through military service, horsemanship, and success in battle. Young aristocrats were raised to hunt dangerous game, ride from an early age, and fight alongside the king. Even the royal court revolved around warfare, with military companions forming the inner circle of the monarchy. The kingdom's greatest strength lay in its cavalry. The wide plains of Lower Macedonia produced exceptional horses, and generations of noble warriors perfected mounted combat, while the heavily armored hoplites of southern Greece dominated battles on foot. Macedonian nobles excelled as horsemen capable of striking swiftly across open ground. This tradition would eventually give rise to one of history's most famous military units, the companion cavalry. But during these early centuries, it remained only one piece of a fragmented military system. The infantry, by comparison, lacked the discipline and organization that distinguished the armies of southern Greece. Soldiers were often drawn from farmers and local communities, equipped with whatever weapons they could afford. Training varied greatly, and campaigns tended to be short and seasonal. Macedon possessed brave warriors, but not yet a professional army. The kingdom also suffered from political fragmentation. Rather than existing as a tightly unified state, Macedonia was divided among regional nobles whose loyalty to the king could never be taken for granted. The monarch relied heavily upon negotiation, marriage alliances, gifts, and personal relationships to maintain unity. Powerful families expected influence at court, and their support often depended upon the king's ability to reward them with land, wealth, or military success. This decentralized system left Macedon vulnerable whenever strong leadership disappeared. The crisis reached its peak during the early 4th century BC. King after king fell in battle, or through assassination. Foreign invasions intensified. The Illyrians inflicted catastrophic defeats upon the Macedonian army, at one point killing King Perdiccas III along with thousands of his soldiers. The royal court descended into chaos as rival claimants struggled for control, while neighboring powers prepared to divide the kingdom among themselves. For many observers, it appeared that Macedon was approaching its end. Few could have imagined that within a single generation, this battered frontier kingdom would become the dominant military power of the ancient world. Yet hidden beneath its political instability were remarkable advantages. Its forests supplied vast quantities of timber essential for building ships and siege engines. Rich deposits of gold and silver promised enormous wealth to any ruler capable of exploiting them. Fertile plains could support a far larger population than the rocky landscapes of southern Greece. Above all, Macedon possessed room to grow. Unlike Athens or Sparta, constrained by geography and surrounded by rival city-states, the Macedonian kingdom had access to abundant land and natural resources that could sustain expansion on an unprecedented scale. All it lacked was the leader capable of unlocking its potential. That leader would emerge during the kingdom's darkest hour, as enemies closed in from every direction and the survival of Macedon hung by a thread. A young prince stepped forward to claim the throne. He had spent years studying the military innovations of Greece, learning diplomacy among foreign courts, and witnessing firsthand the strengths and weaknesses of every rival power surrounding his homeland. His name was Philip II. He would transform a fractured kingdom into the deadliest military machine the ancient world had ever seen, and in doing so, lay the foundation for an empire that would stretch from the Mediterranean Sea to the mountains of India. In 359 BC, the kingdom of Macedon stood on the brink of collapse. The previous king, Perdiccas III, had marched north to confront the Illyrians. Macedonia's most dangerous enemies. The campaign ended in catastrophe. Perdiccas was killed alongside thousands of his soldiers, leaving the kingdom leaderless and exposed. To the north, the Illyrians prepared for another invasion. To the east, the Thracians eyed Macedonian territory. The Paeonians raided across the northern frontier, while rival claimants to the throne sought foreign support to seize power for themselves. From every direction, enemies closed in. Many believed Macedon would soon disappear from history. Instead, it found its greatest king. Philip, the younger brother of Perdiccas III, was only 23 years old when he assumed the throne. Officially, he was meant to serve merely as regent for his infant nephew, but the kingdom's desperate situation left little room for uncertainty. Within months, Philip secured the crown for himself, convincing the Macedonian nobility that only decisive leadership could save the realm. He was an unlikely candidate to reshape the ancient world. Unlike many kings before him, Philip's greatest education had not come from books or royal tutors. It came through captivity. Years earlier, during a period of political turmoil, Philip had been sent as a hostage to the Greek city-state of Thebes. Although the word hostage suggests imprisonment, noble hostages in the Greek world were often treated with considerable respect. Philip lived among the Theban elite, observing one of the most formidable military powers in Greece from the inside. The timing could not have been more fortunate. Thebes was then at the height of its power under the brilliant general Epaminondas, whose innovative tactics had shattered the long-standing military dominance of Sparta. Philip carefully studied the organization, discipline, and battlefield strategies of the Theban army. He watched how professional training could transform ordinary men into an unstoppable fighting force. He learned that battles were won not merely through courage, but through planning, coordination, and innovation. These lessons would remain with him for the rest of his life. Returning to Macedon, Philip inherited a kingdom that lacked everything necessary for survival. Its treasury was nearly empty. Its army had been devastated. Noble families distrusted one another. Foreign enemies sensed weakness. Before Philip could dream of conquest, he first had to ensure Macedon lived long enough to see another year. His first weapon was not the sword, it was diplomacy. Recognizing that Macedonia could not fight every enemy at once, Philip moved swiftly to buy time. He negotiated temporary peace with some rivals, offered gifts where necessary, forged strategic alliances through marriage, and skillfully played neighboring powers against one another. While his enemies believed he was merely delaying the inevitable, Philip quietly rebuilt the kingdom behind the scenes. Then he turned his attention to the army. What followed was one of the greatest military revolutions in history. Rather than relying on seasonal militias, Philip created a permanent, professional fighting force. Soldiers trained year-round instead of only during campaigns. Discipline became relentless. Drills were repeated until every movement became instinctive. Officers were promoted based on ability rather than noble birth, creating a more capable and reliable command structure. But Philip's greatest innovation was the weapon that became synonymous with Macedonian power: the sarissa. Unlike the traditional Greek spear, which measured roughly 8 feet in length, the sarissa stretched between 15 and 21 feet. Crafted from sturdy Cornell wood, it required both hands to wield effectively, forcing soldiers to abandon the large round shields carried by Greek hoplites. Instead, Macedonian infantry used smaller shields strapped to their forearms, allowing them to grip the enormous spear with both hands. The result: transformed warfare. When a Macedonian phalanx advanced, the first several ranks projected their sarissas forward simultaneously, creating an impenetrable forest of spear points. Any enemy attempting to charge the formation faced dozens of spearheads before they could even reach the front line. The deeper ranks continued to push from behind, adding tremendous force to the advance, while replacement soldiers immediately filled any gaps. The phalanx became less like a group of individual soldiers and more like a single living machine. Its effectiveness depended upon perfect discipline. Every man had to maintain formation. Every shield had to overlap correctly. Every spear had to move in harmony with those beside it. One mistake could open a fatal gap, but when properly trained, the formation was nearly unstoppable from the front. Yet Philip understood that no military system was invincible. Unlike many commanders of his age, he refused to rely upon a single type of soldier. Instead, he built an army in which every unit supported the others. The phalanx fixed the enemy in place. The cavalry delivered the killing blow. The elite companion cavalry, recruited primarily from Macedonia's noble families, became the hammer to the phalanx's anvil. While enemy forces struggled against the dense wall of sarissas, heavily armored horsemen swept around the flanks, charging into exposed sides and rear. Few armies of the ancient world could survive such a coordinated assault. Philip further strengthened his forces with archers, javelin throwers, engineers, siege specialists, and light infantry recruited from across the Balkans. For perhaps the first time in European history, an army operated as a fully integrated combined arms force, with each component designed to complement the others. This flexibility gave Macedon a decisive advantage over the armies of the Greek city-states, which still relied heavily on traditional hoplite formations. Philip also revolutionized siege warfare. Most Greek armies preferred open battle, as capturing fortified cities was often slow, costly, and uncertain. Philip invested heavily in military engineers who developed powerful catapults, mobile siege towers, battering rams, and advanced techniques for undermining walls. Cities that once believed themselves secure behind towering fortifications now faced an army capable of reducing even the strongest defenses. His campaigns became exercises in relentless momentum. If an enemy refused battle, Philip besieged their city. If they sought refuge behind mountains, he built roads. If rivers blocked his advance, bridges soon followed. No obstacle remained permanent. Military reform alone, however, could not finance Philip's ambitions. He needed wealth. Fortunately, Macedon possessed it in abundance. Philip seized control of the rich gold and silver mines near Mount Pangaion, dramatically increasing royal revenues. With this newfound wealth, he paid professional soldiers, funded military innovation, built fortifications, and established a royal administration far more efficient than anything Macedonia had previously known. The kingdom was no longer merely surviving. It was becoming the strongest state in Greece. Over the following years, Philip systematically expanded Macedonian influence. He defeated neighboring tribes, secured vulnerable frontiers, annexed valuable territory, and gradually extended his authority across northern Greece. Some cities welcomed his protection. Others resisted and were conquered. Many underestimated him until it was too late. Still, one challenge remained: the Greek city-states themselves. For centuries, Athens, Sparta, Thebes, Corinth, and dozens of smaller polis had fiercely guarded their independence. They often fought one another, but they agreed on one thing: they had no desire to submit to a Macedonian king. Among Philip's fiercest critics was the Athenian statesman Demosthenes, whose famous speeches warned that Philip represented the greatest threat Greece had ever faced. He urged the Greek cities to unite before Macedon became unstoppable. For years, many ignored his warnings. Eventually, they listened. In 338 BC, Athens and Thebes formed an alliance against Philip, assembling one of the largest Greek armies in generations. Their forces met the Macedonians near the small town of Chaeronea in central Greece. The battle would determine the future of the Greek world. Philip personally commanded the Macedonian right wing, while his 18-year-old son Alexander led the companion cavalry on the left. Throughout the battle, Philip deliberately withdrew portions of his line, tempting the Athenians to pursue what appeared to be a retreat. As their formation stretched and lost cohesion, the Macedonian phalanx suddenly turned to counterattack. At that same moment, Alexander launched a devastating cavalry charge against the elite sacred band of Thebes. The veteran Theban warriors fought with extraordinary courage, refusing to surrender even as they were surrounded. Nearly every member of the sacred band was killed where they stood. The Greek alliance collapsed. The Battle of Chaeronea marked the end of an era. For the first time, nearly all of Greece stood under the leadership of a single ruler. Yet Philip understood that ruling through fear alone would never produce lasting stability. Instead of destroying the defeated city-states, he pursued reconciliation. He established the League of Corinth, an alliance that allowed the Greek cities to retain considerable local autonomy while recognizing Philip as their supreme military commander. Together, they would undertake a campaign unlike anything the Greek world had attempted before: the invasion of Persia. For generations, Greeks had remembered the Persian invasions of their homeland during the wars of Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis. Philip presented his planned campaign as both revenge and liberation, a united Greek effort to defeat their ancient enemy once and for all. Preparations began immediately. Armies assembled, supplies were gathered, engineers designed equipment for crossing into Asia. Everything was ready, but Philip would never lead the invasion. In 336 BC, during the wedding celebrations of his daughter at the ancient capital of Aegae, Philip walked into the theater surrounded by cheering crowds. Confident in his popularity, he wore no armor and dismissed many of his guards. As he approached the entrance, one of his own bodyguards suddenly rushed forward. With a single thrust of his dagger, the king fell dead. The assassin was quickly killed before he could be questioned, ensuring that one of history's greatest mysteries would never be fully solved. Was the murder an act of personal revenge? A conspiracy involving rival nobles, Persian agents, or something even closer to the royal family? Ancient historians disagree to this day. What they all agree upon is this: Philip II died just as he stood on the threshold of achieving his greatest ambition. He had transformed Macedon from a vulnerable frontier kingdom into the most powerful military state in the ancient world. He had united Greece. He had built the army that would conquer Persia. He had laid every stone upon which an empire would rise. Now, that empire awaited a new king. His successor was only 20 years old. His name was Alexander. When Philip II fell to the assassin's blade in 336 BC, the kingdom he had spent more than 2 decades building suddenly stood at another crossroads. The empire to be was held together by one man's authority. Although Philip had transformed Macedon into the dominant military power of Greece, his work was far from complete. Many Greek city-states still resented Macedonian rule. Rival noble families watched for signs of weakness. Beyond Macedonia's borders, old enemies waited patiently for the kingdom to descend into another succession crisis. For a brief moment, it appeared history might repeat itself. The throne passed to Philip's 20-year-old son. His name was Alexander. To later generations, he would become known simply as Alexander the Great. But in the days following his father's death, there was nothing inevitable about his future. He was young, untested as king, surrounded by experienced rivals, and inherited a kingdom whose enemies believed it would soon collapse. If Alexander showed even the slightest hesitation, everything Philip had built could disappear. Instead, he moved with astonishing speed. Within hours of Philip's assassination, Alexander secured the loyalty of the Macedonian army, the single most important source of power in the kingdom. The soldiers who had fought beside Philip now proclaimed his son their new king, recognizing not only his royal blood, but also his proven courage in battle. Alexander was no stranger to military command. At just 16 years old, while Philip campaigned abroad, Alexander had served as regent of Macedonia. During his father's absence, he successfully crushed a local rebellion and even founded a city bearing his own name, demonstrating a confidence that belied his age. 2 years later, at the Battle of Chaeronea, he had commanded the companion cavalry on the Macedonian left wing. Ancient historians credit his daring charge with helping break the Sacred Band of Thebes, one of the most elite military units in the Greek world. Whether these accounts are somewhat exaggerated or not, there is little doubt that Alexander had already earned the respect of many veterans long before he became king. Yet, battlefield success alone could not secure the throne. The royal court remained filled with potential enemies. As was common in the ancient world, succession often meant eliminating rivals before they could eliminate you. Several possible claimants to the Macedonian throne were swiftly removed. Some were executed, others fled into exile. Harsh though these actions may seem today, they reflected the brutal political reality of the 4th century BC. Mercy toward rivals often invited civil war. Alexander understood that survival came first. Only after securing his position at home could he deal with threats abroad. Those threats emerged almost immediately. News of Philip's death spread rapidly across Greece, and many cities interpreted it as an opportunity to regain their independence. Athens openly celebrated. Anti-Macedonian leaders proclaimed that the young king would never possess his father's authority. In the north, the Thracians and Illyrians prepared to rebel, believing Macedon once again vulnerable. The entire empire Philip had begun constructing threatened to unravel. Alexander responded with breathtaking energy. Rather than remaining in the safety of his capital, he marched north at the head of his army. In a rapid series of campaigns, he crushed revolts among the Thracian tribes, crossed the rugged Balkan mountains, defeated the Triballi near the Danube River, and turned westward to confront the Illyrians, the same enemies who had nearly destroyed Macedonia only a generation earlier. The speed of these victories stunned the ancient world. Alexander seemed to appear wherever danger arose, often before news of the previous campaign had reached distant cities. His enemies struggled to keep pace with him. Then came a rumor that nearly changed history. While Alexander campaigned in the north, false reports spread through Greece, claiming he had been killed in battle. Thebes seized the opportunity. One of Greece's proudest and most powerful cities expelled its Macedonian garrison and declared independence. Encouraged by Athenian promises of support, Theban leaders called upon all Greeks to rise against Macedonian domination. For many, this appeared to be the beginning of a general revolt. Alexander's response became legendary. Rather than slowly marching south, he drove his army at extraordinary speed across nearly 300 miles of difficult terrain. Within roughly 2 weeks, the Macedonian army stood outside the walls of Thebes. The rebels could scarcely believe their eyes. The man they thought dead had arrived with the most powerful army in Greece. Alexander initially offered generous terms. If the city surrendered, he promised mercy. The Thebans refused. Confident in their strong fortifications and expecting aid from other Greek states, they prepared for a siege. No help ever came. When Macedonian forces finally breached the city's defenses, the fighting was swift and brutal. Street by street, house by house, Alexander's soldiers overwhelmed the defenders. The consequences were devastating. Thousands of Thebans were killed during the assault. Tens of thousands more were sold into slavery. The city itself, one of the greatest in Greece, was almost completely destroyed. Ancient sources claim that only temples, sacred buildings, and the house of the poet Pindar were spared. The destruction of Thebes shocked the entire Greek world. Athens, which had quietly considered joining the rebellion, immediately abandoned any thoughts of war. Other cities quickly renewed their loyalty. Alexander had delivered a clear message. Resistance would not merely fail, it would be remembered. Historians continue to debate Alexander's decision at Thebes. Some argue the destruction was an unnecessary act of cruelty against fellow Greeks. Others contend it prevented a far bloodier series of wars by convincing every other city that rebellion was hopeless. Whatever his motives, the result was undeniable. By the end of 335 BC, Greece was once again firmly under Macedonian control. Now, for the first time, Alexander could turn his attention toward the ambition his father had left unfinished: the invasion of Persia. The Persian Empire remained the greatest superpower on earth. Stretching from modern-day Turkey to Egypt, from Mesopotamia to Central Asia, it ruled tens of millions of people across an immense territory. Its royal capitals overflowed with unimaginable wealth. Its road network connected distant provinces. Its administrative system governed lands larger than any empire Greece had ever known. For more than 200 years, Persian kings had dominated the Near East. Many believed they were invincible. Alexander saw something different. He inherited not only Philip's army, but also his father's carefully prepared strategy. Supplies had already been gathered. Engineers had assembled siege equipment. Diplomatic agreements were in place. A small advance force had even crossed into Asia before Philip's assassination. The machinery of conquest already existed. Alexander simply intended to lead it. Still, the risks were enormous. His army numbered roughly 40,000 to 50,000 men, depending on the source, an impressive force by Greek standards, but tiny compared to the manpower available to Persia. King Darius III could theoretically draw soldiers from dozens of nations under his rule, fielding armies several times larger than Alexander's. Many advisors urged caution. Some believed the campaign should be delayed until Macedonia's position became even stronger. Others questioned whether a 22-year-old king should gamble everything on an invasion of the world's largest empire. Alexander dismissed such doubts. He possessed an extraordinary confidence that bordered on absolute certainty. Ancient writers frequently describe him as believing he was destined for greatness. Whether this confidence arose from careful calculation, youthful ambition, or genuine faith in divine favor is impossible to know. What is certain is that Alexander inspired the same belief in those who followed him. Before departing, he visited sacred sites throughout Greece, offering sacrifices to the gods and seeking favorable omens. At Delphi, according to later tradition, the famous oracle initially refused to receive him because it was an inauspicious day. Alexander reportedly dragged the priestess toward the temple until she exclaimed, "You are invincible." Whether the story is true or merely legend, it perfectly captures how later generations viewed him. They believed destiny itself bent to his will. In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander gathered his army near the shores of the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Europe from Asia. Behind him lay the kingdom his father had forged. Ahead stood the Persian Empire. Before crossing, Alexander performed one final symbolic act. He visited the ruins of ancient Troy, the legendary city immortalized in Homer's Iliad. Since childhood, Alexander had admired Achilles, the greatest hero of Greek mythology. His tutor, the philosopher Aristotle, had given him a copy of the Iliad, which ancient writers claimed Alexander carried with him throughout much of his campaign. Standing upon the plains where Achilles was believed to have fought centuries earlier, Alexander honored the fallen hero at his tomb. Some accounts say he raced naked around the burial mound in the ancient tradition of heroic athletes. Others claim he exchanged his own armor for sacred weapons preserved in the temple of Athena. Whether every detail is historical or embellished through legend, the symbolism was unmistakable. Alexander did not see himself as merely beginning a military campaign. He believed he was continuing the story of the greatest heroes of Greece. Soon afterward, his fleet crossed the Hellespont. As his ship approached the Asian shore, Alexander reportedly hurled his spear into the ground before stepping onto the beach. The gesture carried a simple but powerful meaning. Asia had been claimed by the spear, not through diplomacy, not through inheritance, but by conquest. The greatest campaign in ancient history had begun. In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander of Macedon stepped onto the shores of Asia. Behind him lay Europe. Ahead stretched the greatest empire the world had ever known. For more than 2 centuries, the Persian Empire had dominated the ancient Near East. Founded by Cyrus the Great and expanded by rulers such as Darius I and Xerxes I, it governed an immense territory from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River. Its provinces supplied vast wealth to the royal treasury. Its royal road connected distant capitals across thousands of miles. Its armies drew soldiers from dozens of different peoples, speaking countless languages and fighting under a single king. Compared to Persia, Macedon seemed insignificant. Alexander commanded fewer than 50,000 men. Persia could call upon hundreds of thousands across its empire, though never all at once. On paper, the invasion looked almost impossible. Alexander knew he could not afford a long war. The farther he marched into Asia, the more vulnerable his supply lines became. If the Persians managed to unite their forces and destroy his army in a single battle, everything his father had built would vanish. He needed momentum. He needed victories. Above all, he needed to convince both his own soldiers and the Persian world that the impossible was becoming reality. The first challenge came sooner than expected. Persian satraps, the governors responsible for the empire's western provinces, had gathered an army near the Granicus River in northwestern Asia Minor. Rather than waiting for King Darius III to arrive with the empire's full strength, they hoped to crush the Macedonians before they gained a foothold in Asia. The Persian commanders occupied the opposite bank of the river, positioning their cavalry along the steep shoreline while Greek mercenaries stood behind them. They believed the river itself would protect their position. Any army attempting to cross would be vulnerable as it climbed the muddy banks under constant attack. Several of Alexander's own generals urged caution. The current was strong. The terrain favored the defenders. A direct assault seemed reckless. Alexander disagreed. He understood that hesitation could be interpreted as weakness. If his very first battle ended in delay, confidence throughout the campaign might begin to erode. He ordered the attack. The crossing proved every bit as dangerous as expected. Macedonian cavalry splashed into the fast-moving river, while Persian horsemen charged down from higher ground. Spears shattered. Horses slipped on the muddy banks. Fighting quickly descended into brutal hand-to-hand combat. Alexander placed himself in the thickest part of the battle. Clad in gleaming armor marked by a white-plumed helmet, he became an unmistakable target for Persian nobles eager to end the invasion by killing its commander. According to ancient historians, one Persian cavalry officer struck Alexander's helmet with such force that the metal cracked beneath the blow. Moments later, another raised his sword for what might have been a fatal strike. Before the weapon could fall, one of Alexander's closest companions, Clytus the Black, charged forward and severed the Persian's arm, saving the young king's life. It would not be the last time Alexander survived by the narrowest of margins. Once the Macedonian cavalry established a foothold across the river, the disciplined phalanx followed. Their long sarissas steadily pushed the Persian line backward while the companion cavalry exploited every opening. The Persian army broke. Thousands fled the battlefield. The Greek mercenaries fighting for Persia were surrounded. Many were killed where they stood, while thousands of survivors were captured and sent back to Greece in chains. A deliberate warning against Greeks who chose to fight for Persia rather than alongside their fellow Hellenes. The Battle of the Granicus marked Alexander's first major victory against Persia. Its military significance was considerable. Its psychological impact was even greater. Cities throughout Western Asia Minor suddenly faced a choice: resist the Macedonians or surrender peacefully. Many chose surrender. Alexander skillfully presented himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as a liberator. Greek cities under Persian control welcomed him enthusiastically, believing they had finally been freed from imperial rule. In many places, Alexander restored local governments while removing Persian officials, carefully portraying his campaign as the liberation of fellow Greeks rather than simple conquest. The strategy worked brilliantly. With relatively little fighting, much of Asia Minor opened its gates. As Alexander advanced southward, he reached one of antiquity's most famous legends, the city of Gordium. According to ancient tradition, an impossibly intricate knot bound the chariot of the legendary King Gordius. An old prophecy declared that whoever untied the knot would become ruler of all Asia. Many had tried. None had succeeded. What happened next has become one of history's most enduring stories. Some ancient writers claim Alexander examined the knot carefully before drawing his sword and slicing cleanly through it with a single stroke. Others suggest he discovered the hidden pin fastening the knot together and simply removed it. Whatever the historical truth, the message spread rapidly. Alexander had solved the impossible. The Gordian knot became a symbol of decisive action, solving seemingly unsolvable problems through boldness rather than hesitation. As legend and victory intertwined, Alexander's reputation grew. Yet the Persian king himself had not yet entered the war. King Darius III now recognized the seriousness of the threat. Gathering forces from across his vast empire, he assembled one of the largest armies of his reign. Confident in his overwhelming numbers, Darius intended to crush the Macedonians personally. The two armies finally met in 333 BC near the town of Issus, along the southeastern coast of modern-day Turkey. Ironically, the battlefield favored Alexander. Darius had hoped to fight on open plains, where his superior numbers could surround the Macedonians. Instead, difficult terrain between mountains and the sea compressed both armies into a narrow corridor, preventing the Persians from fully deploying their numerical advantage. Once again, Alexander seized the initiative. The Macedonian phalanx advanced steadily through the center, while fierce fighting erupted along the river, separating the two forces. As the battle intensified, Alexander spotted the true objective, not the Persian army, the Persian king. Leading the companion cavalry, he launched a direct charge toward Darius himself. The assault shattered the Persian left. As Macedonian horsemen drove relentlessly toward the royal chariot, panic spread through the Persian command. Fearing encirclement, Darius made a decision that would haunt his reputation forever. He fled. The moment the great king abandoned the battlefield, discipline throughout the Persian army collapsed. Soldiers who had stood firm moments earlier now scattered in every direction. Alexander had defeated the ruler of the largest empire on earth. The victory yielded extraordinary prizes. Among the Persian camp were Darius's own mother, wife, daughters, and young son, all captured alive. Expecting humiliation or execution, the royal family instead received remarkable treatment. Alexander ordered that they be treated with dignity and respect. He allowed them to retain their royal titles and comforts, assuring Darius's mother that she had lost no son but gained another. This display of mercy astonished both Greeks and Persians. It also became a powerful piece of political theater. Alexander wished to rule Persia, not merely destroy it. Darius soon sent envoys offering peace. He proposed an enormous ransom for his captured family, vast sums of gold, and even territory west of the Euphrates River. One of Alexander's senior generals, Parmenion, reportedly remarked, "If I were Alexander, I would accept." Alexander famously replied, "So would I, if I were Parmenion." Whether those exact words were spoken is impossible to know. Their meaning, however, reflected Alexander's ambitions perfectly. He no longer sought limited victories. He intended to conquer the entire Persian Empire. Before pursuing Darius deeper into Asia, One obstacle remained: the Persian navy. Although Alexander dominated on land, Persia still possessed a powerful fleet operating from ports along the eastern Mediterranean. As long as those harbors remained in Persian hands, Macedonian communications with Greece could be threatened. Alexander therefore turned south. Most Phoenician cities surrendered peacefully. One refused: Tyre. Built partly upon a heavily fortified island, roughly half a mile offshore, Tyre was considered nearly impregnable. Massive walls rose directly from the sea, while the city's fleet controlled surrounding waters. When Alexander requested permission to enter the city and offer sacrifices at the temple of Melkart, the Tyrians refused. He answered with a siege. What followed became one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. Alexander ordered his men to construct an enormous causeway stretching from the mainland to the island itself. Stone, timber, and earth were dumped into the sea day after day, while Persian ships attacked the workers from every direction. The defenders launched fire ships. They rained arrows upon the builders. They conducted surprise raids at night. Again and again, the Macedonians rebuilt. Eventually, Alexander assembled a fleet of his own, using ships provided by recently surrendered Phoenician cities. With control of the surrounding waters secured, siege towers taller than Tyre's walls rolled forward across the completed causeway. After 7 exhausting months, Macedonian forces finally breached the defenses. The city fell. Ancient sources describe the aftermath as devastating. Thousands of defenders died during the assault, while many survivors were sold into slavery. Though brutal, the destruction of Tyre sent an unmistakable message throughout the eastern Mediterranean. No fortress was beyond Alexander's reach. With Phoenicia secured, he marched into Egypt. Unlike many regions of the Persian Empire, Egypt offered little resistance. For decades, Egyptians had resented Persian rule, viewing their foreign governors as oppressive outsiders. Alexander arrived not as another conqueror, but as a liberator. The gates of Memphis opened without a fight. Priests welcomed him into the temples. The Egyptian people proclaimed him their new pharaoh. Seeking to strengthen his legitimacy, Alexander journeyed deep into the western desert to visit the famous oracle of Amun at the oasis of Siwa. The journey itself was perilous. For days, the army crossed barren desert where water was scarce and landmarks almost non-existent. Ancient writers later embellished the expedition with stories of divine guidance, mysterious ravens, and miraculous rainfall, leading the king safely through the wilderness. Inside the temple, the high priest greeted Alexander privately. Exactly what was said remains one of history's enduring mysteries. Ancient accounts differ dramatically. Some claim the priest hailed Alexander as the son of Zeus Ammon. Others insist only that favorable prophecies were delivered. Whatever occurred within the sanctuary remained known only to Alexander and the priest. Yet afterward, Alexander appeared more convinced than ever that destiny favored his ambitions. Before leaving Egypt, he made one final decision that would outlast every battlefield victory. On the Mediterranean coast, between the sea and Lake Mareotis, he selected the site for a new city. It would bear his own name, Alexandria. Designed according to a carefully planned grid, the city occupied one of the finest natural harbors in the Mediterranean. Alexander envisioned it not merely as another military settlement, but as a center of trade, administration, and culture linking Greece, Egypt, and the wider world. He would never see the city reach its full glory. Yet in the centuries to come, Alexandria would become one of the greatest cities in history. Home to the legendary Library of Alexandria, the towering Pharos Lighthouse, renowned scholars, and scientific discoveries that shaped civilization for generations. When Alexander departed Egypt in 331 BC, he left behind a loyal province, a new capital, and an ever-growing legend. But his greatest challenge still lay ahead. The Persian Empire had not yet fallen. King Darius III was gathering another army, larger, stronger, and determined to end the Macedonian invasion once and for all. The fate of Asia would soon be decided on the plains of Gaugamela. By the autumn of 331 BC, Alexander had accomplished what many believed impossible. In just 3 years, he had driven the Persian Empire from Asia Minor, conquered the eastern Mediterranean, captured Egypt without a major battle, and established a growing reputation as one of history's greatest military commanders. Yet despite these astonishing victories, the Persian Empire still stood. King Darius III remained alive. The empire's vast eastern provinces continued to supply men, horses, and wealth. Most importantly, Alexander had not yet won the one victory that would truly determine the fate of Asia. The decisive battle still lay ahead. After leaving Egypt, Alexander marched northeast through Syria and crossed the Euphrates River, before continuing toward the fertile plains of Mesopotamia. His army moved with remarkable discipline. Supply trains stretched for miles. Engineers built bridges where necessary, while scouts constantly searched ahead for signs of Persian movements. This time, Darius intended to make no mistakes. Having learned from his defeat at Issus, he carefully selected a battlefield near the village of Gaugamela, not far from the city of Arbela in modern-day Iraq. Unlike the narrow valley at Issus, Gaugamela offered exactly what Persia wanted, an enormous open plain. For weeks before the battle, Persian workers reportedly leveled the ground, removing rocks and uneven terrain so that Darius could fully deploy his massive cavalry and deadly scythe chariots, specialized vehicles equipped with long blades extending from their wheels, designed to slice through enemy infantry. Everything favored Persia. Darius assembled perhaps the largest army of his reign. Ancient historians offered fantastically exaggerated numbers, sometimes claiming hundreds of thousands or even 1 million soldiers. Modern historians consider these figures impossible, but there is little doubt that the Persian army significantly outnumbered Alexander's force. It included cavalry from across Central Asia, elite Persian nobles, Greek mercenaries, Indian warriors, archers from distant provinces, even war elephants, likely the first Alexander had ever encountered. It was an army drawn from nearly every corner of the Persian Empire. Facing them stood approximately 47,000 Macedonian and allied troops. As the two armies prepared for battle, one of Alexander's most experienced generals, Parmenion, offered practical advice. Why risk everything in daylight? The Macedonians could launch a surprise attack under cover of darkness. Alexander refused. "I will not steal my victory." Whether those exact words were spoken cannot be proven, but they perfectly reflect the image ancient historians wish to preserve. A commander determined to win openly, through superior leadership rather than deception. The night before the battle, many Macedonian soldiers struggled to sleep. Alexander reportedly rested peacefully. When questioned about his calmness, he simply replied that there was nothing left to fear. The next morning, as the sun rose over the plains of Gaugamela, two civilizations prepared for one of history's greatest battles. Darius positioned himself at the center of his immense line, standing atop a magnificent royal chariot surrounded by the elite immortals and his personal bodyguard. Alexander placed himself, as always, on the right wing beside the companion cavalry. The battle began with an unusual maneuver. Instead of advancing directly forward, Alexander moved diagonally to his right. At first glance, the movement seemed strange. In reality, it was brilliant. By shifting sideways, Alexander forced the Persians to extend their own line in an attempt to prevent him from outflanking them. As they stretched farther and farther across the plain, gaps slowly began to appear between different units. Alexander had created exactly the opening he wanted. Darius ordered his feared scythed chariots forward. The massive vehicles thundered across the battlefield, blades spinning as they accelerated toward the Macedonian phalanx. But Philip II's disciplined army had prepared for this very possibility. At the last moment, Macedonian soldiers calmly opened lanes within their formation. Instead of crashing into a solid wall of spears, Many chariots passed harmlessly through the gaps, where they were surrounded and destroyed by light infantry waiting behind the main line. Persia's terrifying new weapon had failed. Meanwhile, fierce fighting erupted across the battlefield. On the Macedonian left, Parmenion struggled under relentless attacks from Persian cavalry. For a time, it appeared his wing might collapse. The battle hung in the balance. Then Alexander saw it, a widening gap near the Persian center. Without hesitation, he gathered the companion cavalry into their famous wedge formation. Thousands of horsemen lowered their lances. Alexander gave the order. The charge began. Like a spear thrust into the heart of the Persian army, the companion cavalry smashed directly through the opening. The Macedonian king rode at the very front, leading one of history's most decisive cavalry assaults. Persian soldiers scattered before the impact. Within minutes, Alexander was driving straight toward Darius himself. For the second time, the Persian king watched Macedonian horsemen racing toward his position. And for the second time, he fled. The sight of the great king's chariot turning away shattered Persian morale. Across the battlefield, soldiers began abandoning their positions. Entire formations dissolved into chaos. The greatest empire on earth was collapsing before everyone's eyes. Alexander wanted only one thing: to capture Darius alive. He launched an immediate pursuit, racing eastward with the companion cavalry. But just as victory seemed complete, desperate messengers arrived from Parmenion. The Macedonian left remained under enormous pressure. If Alexander continued chasing Darius, his own army risked destruction. Faced with an impossible choice, Alexander turned back. He saved his army. Darius escaped. Although the Persian king lived to fight another day, the Battle of Gaugamela effectively ended the Persian Empire as a great power. There would never again be another army capable of defending it. With the road to Mesopotamia now open, Alexander marched toward one of the richest cities in the world, Babylon. Few cities possessed such ancient prestige. Already thousands of years old, Babylon had been a center of civilization long before the rise of Greece or Persia. Its massive walls, magnificent temples, and legendary hanging gardens had inspired generations of travelers. The city did not resist. Its gates opened peacefully. Priests welcomed Alexander with elaborate ceremonies. The people celebrated the arrival of their new ruler. Rather than treating Babylon as conquered territory, Alexander carefully respected its traditions. He restored neglected temples, honored local religious customs, and allowed existing officials to continue governing under Macedonian supervision. This policy became a hallmark of his rule. Unlike many conquerors, Alexander rarely sought to erase the cultures he defeated. He intended to rule them. From Babylon, he continued southeast toward Susa, another Persian royal capital. Once again, resistance proved minimal. The treasures awaiting him were almost beyond imagination. Ancient sources describe immense quantities of gold, silver, precious jewels, royal furniture, and luxury goods accumulated over generations of Persian kings. Modern estimates suggest the wealth captured at Susa amounted to thousands of tons of precious metals. The financial foundation of the Persian Empire now belonged to Alexander. His soldiers, many of whom had left Macedonia with little more than their weapons, suddenly found themselves richer than they had ever imagined. Yet one destination remained: the symbolic heart of Persian power, Persepolis. Nestled beneath the mountains of southern Iran, Persepolis was more than a capital. It was the ceremonial center of the Achaemenid Empire. Its magnificent palaces stood upon an enormous stone terrace, decorated with intricate carvings depicting delegations from every province of the empire, bringing tribute to the great king. For generations, Persian monarchs had celebrated their greatest ceremonies there. Alexander entered the city in triumph. For a time, he admired its extraordinary beauty. Then came one of the most controversial episodes of his career: the burning of Persepolis. Ancient historians disagree about exactly why it happened. Some claim the fire began during a drunken celebration after a banquet, encouraged by a Greek courtesan named Thais, who urged Alexander to avenge the Persian destruction of Athens more than a century earlier. Others believe the burning was a calculated political act, a deliberate demonstration that Persian imperial power had truly ended. Whatever the cause, flames soon consumed much of the magnificent palace complex. Columns collapsed. Cedar roofs crashed into the fire. Centuries of imperial history disappeared in smoke. Later in life, Alexander reportedly regretted the destruction. Today, the ruins of Persepolis remain one of the world's greatest archaeological treasures, bearing silent witness to both the glory of Persia and the cost of conquest. Although the empire had effectively fallen, Alexander refused to declare victory, while Darius remained free. The Persian king fled eastward across the Iranian plateau, hoping to raise another army among the empire's remaining provinces. Alexander pursued relentlessly, across deserts, over mountain ranges, through territories increasingly unfamiliar even to Persian guides. The chase stretched for months, but events soon took an unexpected turn. As Alexander closed the distance, confidence in Darius evaporated. Many Persian nobles no longer believed their king could save the empire. Among them was Bessus, satrap of Bactria, and one of Darius's senior commanders. Convinced that the war was lost, Bessus arrested his own king. The once mighty ruler of Persia became a prisoner of his own officers. When Alexander's advance drew dangerously close, the conspirators made a fateful decision. Rather than allowing Darius to fall alive into Macedonian hands, they stabbed him repeatedly and abandoned him beside the road before fleeing eastward. Not long afterward, Alexander's cavalry discovered the dying king. Ancient accounts describe a poignant scene. Mortally wounded, Darius reportedly asked for water before expressing gratitude that Alexander had treated his captured family with kindness. Whether every detail is historically accurate cannot be known. What is certain is that Darius III died shortly before Alexander arrived. The last great king of Persia was gone. Alexander ordered that his former enemy receive a royal burial according to Persian custom. It was an extraordinary gesture. The conqueror honored the man he had defeated. More importantly, Alexander now presented himself not merely as the destroyer of the Persian Empire, but as its legitimate successor. He adopted the title King of Asia. He began wearing certain elements of Persian royal dress during official ceremonies. He retained many experienced Persian administrators. Increasingly, Alexander no longer ruled solely as a Macedonian king. He ruled as the heir to both Macedonia and Persia. Not everyone welcomed these changes. Many Macedonian officers believed they had come to conquer Persia, not become Persians themselves. Quiet resentment began spreading through the army. Alexander, however, believed something far greater was possible. He envisioned an empire in which Macedonians and Persians served together, where Greek and Eastern cultures blended rather than remained divided, where loyalty depended not upon ethnicity, but upon allegiance to a single king. It was an ambitious vision, one that would transform civilization. But before Alexander could build this new world, he faced one final challenge. Beyond the eastern frontiers of Persia lay lands that few Greeks had ever seen. Towering mountains, endless deserts, nomadic horsemen, and kingdoms stretching toward India. Most rulers would have stopped. Alexander had only begun. The road now led east, toward the edge of the known world. By 330 BC, Alexander had achieved what generations of Greek rulers had only dreamed of. The Persian Empire was no more. Its capitals belonged to him. Its treasury filled his coffers. Its king was dead. For many of his officers, the campaign was over. They had crossed from Europe into Asia to defeat Persia, and they had succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. They expected the army would soon turn west, return to Macedon, and enjoy the rewards of victory. Alexander had other ideas. Standing in the former palaces of the Persian kings, he no longer saw himself simply as the conqueror of an empire. He saw himself as its rightful ruler. And as long as parts of that empire remained beyond his control, his work was unfinished. Far to the east lay the vast provinces of Bactria and Sogdiana, regions corresponding to parts of modern-day Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. These lands had technically belonged to Persia, but in practice they were ruled by powerful local nobles and tribal leaders who enjoyed considerable independence. More importantly, the man responsible for the murder of Darius III had fled there, Bessus. Declaring himself the new great king under the royal name Artaxerxes V, Bessus hoped to rally the eastern provinces against the Macedonian invader. Alexander could not allow that. If anyone claimed to be the legitimate king of Persia, it would undermine his own authority. The pursuit began. What followed was unlike anything Alexander or his army had experienced before. The fertile plains of Mesopotamia gave way to towering mountain ranges. Ancient roads disappeared into narrow valleys. The blazing heat of the deserts alternated with freezing alpine passes. The farther east the Macedonians marched, the more difficult their campaign became. Unlike the Persian Empire's western provinces, there were few great cities to capture. Instead, Alexander faced scattered fortresses, fiercely independent tribes, and enemies who preferred ambushes to open battle. Traditional victories meant little. The war had become a grueling test of endurance. Eventually, Bessus's own followers lost faith in him. Realizing Alexander's advance could not be stopped, several Persian nobles arrested the self-proclaimed king, stripped him naked, and handed him over to the Macedonians. Alexander ordered that Bessus be punished not merely as an enemy, but as a traitor. After all, Bessus had betrayed and murdered his own king. Ancient accounts differ regarding the exact method of execution. Some claim he was publicly mutilated before being executed according to Persian custom. Others record that he was eventually put to death in the city of Ecbatana. The message was unmistakable. Alexander intended to rule Persia according to its traditions. Those who betrayed the Persian throne would answer to him. Yet, eliminating Bessus did not end the war. If anything, the fighting became even harder. Across Central Asia, local resistance intensified. Rather than facing large armies, Alexander encountered skilled horsemen who struck suddenly before disappearing into deserts and mountains beyond pursuit. Supply lines stretched across thousands of miles, making every campaign increasingly difficult. One leader proved especially troublesome, a Sogdian noble named Spitamenes. Using fast-moving cavalry, Spitamenes repeatedly attacked isolated Macedonian detachments before vanishing into the wilderness. Entire garrisons were destroyed. Communication became hazardous. For the first time since entering Asia, Alexander found himself fighting a prolonged guerrilla war. The campaign dragged on for nearly 3 years. It tested both Alexander's military genius and his patience. To secure the region permanently, he adopted a strategy that reached beyond warfare alone. Wherever he conquered territory, Alexander founded new cities. Ancient sources attribute more than 20 cities to him, many bearing the name Alexandria. These settlements served several purposes at once. They housed retired soldiers, protected important trade routes, established administrative centers, and spread Greek language and culture into newly conquered regions. Some disappeared over time. Others survived for centuries. One of them, Alexandria Ishate, or Alexandria the Farthest, stood near the edge of the known Greek world, marking just how far Alexander had pushed eastward. During these campaigns, another event would shape Alexander's personal life. In 327 BC, after capturing the seemingly impregnable Sogdian Rock, a mountain fortress whose defenders had boasted that only soldiers with wings could conquer it, Alexander encountered a young noblewoman named Roxana. According to ancient historians, she was renowned for her beauty. Whether theirs was truly a romance or a politically advantageous marriage remains uncertain. Most likely, it was both. By marrying Roxana, daughter of the Bactrian noble Oxyartes, Alexander strengthened his relationship with the local aristocracy, while demonstrating his willingness to unite Macedonian and Persian elites. Many of his officers approved, others quietly worried. Increasingly, Alexander seemed to embrace Eastern customs. He wore Persian clothing during official ceremonies. He recruited Persian nobles into positions of authority. He expected some members of his court to practice proskynesis, the Persian tradition of bowing deeply before the king. To Persians, this was a normal expression of royal respect. To many Macedonians and Greeks, it bordered on worship. Tension within the army steadily grew. One incident revealed just how dangerous those tensions had become. At a banquet, Alexander quarreled with one of his oldest companions, Clitus the Black, the very man who had saved his life at the Battle of the Granicus years earlier. Fueled by heavy drinking, both men exchanged bitter insults. Clitus criticized Alexander for abandoning Macedonian traditions and adopting Persian customs. Alexander, enraged beyond reason, seized a spear. Before anyone could stop him, he killed his friend. Silence filled the room. Almost immediately, Alexander realized what he had done. Ancient writers describe him collapsing in grief, refusing food, and attempting to take his own life in despair. Whether these accounts are fully accurate or somewhat dramatized, they reveal an important truth. Years of constant campaigning had begun to change him. The young king who had crossed into Asia was becoming something else. The burdens of empire, endless warfare, and absolute power weighed heavily upon him. Yet his ambition remained undiminished. Beyond the mountains lay another land that fascinated Greek imagination: India. To the Greeks, India marked the edge of the known world. Stories spoke of immense rivers, exotic animals, fabulous wealth, and powerful kingdoms unlike anything found farther west. Alexander intended to see it for himself. In 327 BC, the Macedonian army crossed the towering Hindu Kush mountains, entering the Indian subcontinent after one of the most difficult marches of the campaign. The journey itself proved exhausting. Narrow mountain paths challenged even experienced soldiers. Pack animals struggled with supplies. Weather shifted dramatically between scorching valleys and freezing passes. Still, Alexander pressed onward. Many local rulers submitted peacefully. Others resisted. The most formidable opponent emerged in 326 BC, King Porus. Porus ruled the region between the Hydaspes and Acacynes rivers, modern-day Punjab. Unlike previous enemies, he possessed a weapon Alexander had never faced in large numbers: war elephants. When the two armies met along the banks of the Hydaspes River, heavy monsoon rains had swollen the waterway into a powerful barrier. Porus expected Alexander to attempt a direct crossing. Instead, the Macedonian king once again relied upon deception. For days, his army marched visibly along the riverbank, making repeated feints while creating confusion about where the actual crossing would occur. Then, under cover of darkness during a violent storm, Alexander secretly led part of his army several miles upstream. Using boats, rafts, and improvised floats, they crossed the flooded river before dawn. By the time Porus realized what had happened, the Macedonians were already advancing. The Battle of the Hydaspes became one of Alexander's hardest-fought victories. Rain turned the battlefield into mud. The Indian war elephants charged into the Macedonian lines, terrifying horses unaccustomed to the massive animals. Some elephants trampled soldiers beneath enormous feet. Others, wounded and panicked, rampaged through friend and foe alike. The fighting lasted for hours. Slowly, Macedonian discipline prevailed. The phalanx adapted. Archers targeted the elephant drivers. Cavalry exploited openings on the flanks. Eventually, Porus's army began to collapse. Yet unlike many defeated rulers, Porus refused to flee. Even after being wounded, he continued fighting atop his elephant until he was finally surrounded. Brought before Alexander, the defeated king was asked a simple question. "How should I treat you?" Porus answered, "Like a king." Alexander smiled. "That shall be done." Impressed by his courage, Alexander not only restored Porus to his throne, but expanded his kingdom, making him one of the Macedonian Empire's most trusted allies in India. The victory demonstrated something Alexander increasingly understood. A conquered people governed by respected local rulers often remained more loyal than territories ruled entirely through force. But beyond the Hydaspes lay an even greater challenge. According to local guides, farther east stretched the mighty Ganges River, beyond which lay the enormous Nanda Empire, said to possess thousands of war elephants and armies vastly larger than any Alexander had yet encountered. The prospect alone exhausted his soldiers. They had marched for nearly 8 years. They had crossed deserts, climbed mountains, fought in unfamiliar climates, and traveled farther than any Greek army in history. Many had not seen their families since leaving Macedonia. Their armor was worn, their bodies scarred, their spirits fading. When the army reached the Hyphasis River, Alexander announced his intention to continue eastward. This time, the soldiers refused. It was the first open mutiny of his reign. At first, Alexander believed he could persuade them. He reminded them of their victories. He promised even greater glory. He spoke of reaching the Eastern Ocean, the legendary end of the world. No one moved. For days, the army stood silent. Finally, one of his senior officers, Conus, spoke on behalf of the men. The soldiers, he explained respectfully, were exhausted. They wished only to see their homes again. Alexander withdrew to his tent. For 3 days, he refused to emerge. Perhaps he hoped the army would change its mind. It did not. Reluctantly, he accepted reality. After consulting favorable omens, or perhaps allowing them to provide a graceful political excuse, Alexander announced that the gods themselves had instructed him to turn back. The Eastern conquest had reached its limit. Before departing, he ordered 12 enormous altars built beside the river, monuments marking the farthest point reached by the Macedonian army. The dream of conquering the entire known world had ended. The journey home, however, would prove no less dangerous. Thousands more miles remained. Deserts awaited. Rivers had yet to be crossed, and Alexander himself had changed forever. He had begun his campaign as the king of Macedon. Now he ruled an empire stretching across 3 continents. The question was no longer whether he could conquer the world. It was whether anyone, perhaps even Alexander himself, could hold it together. When Alexander turned his army westward from the banks of the Hyphasis River in 326 BC, he ruled an empire unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. From the snow-covered mountains of the Balkans to the fertile valleys of the Indus River, from the deserts of Egypt to the highlands of Central Asia, his dominion stretched more than 3,000 miles across 3 continents. No king before him had united so many different peoples beneath a single crown. They spoke dozens of languages, worshipped different gods, followed different laws, and carried centuries of rival traditions. Conquering them had been extraordinary. Governing them would prove even more difficult. Most conquerors throughout history imposed their own customs upon the people they defeated. Alexander attempted something remarkably different. Rather than destroying the Persian system of government, he largely preserved it. The vast Achaemenid Empire had already developed one of the world's most sophisticated administrative networks. Provinces known as satrapies were governed by officials responsible for collecting taxes, maintaining order, and administering justice. Royal roads connected distant cities, allowing messages and supplies to move with impressive speed. Alexander recognized the value of this system. Instead of replacing every Persian official, he retained many experienced administrators while placing trusted Macedonian officers alongside them. In some provinces, Persian nobles continued governing under Macedonian supervision. In others, Greeks and Persians shared authority. It was a practical decision. There simply were not enough Macedonians to rule such an enormous empire alone. Alexander understood that cooperation was not merely desirable, it was necessary. This philosophy extended beyond government. As his empire expanded, Alexander increasingly encouraged the blending of cultures. Greek architects helped construct cities across Asia. Persian administrators continued managing local affairs. Egyptian priests retained their ancient religious traditions. Babylonian astronomers contributed centuries of scientific knowledge. Rather than forcing every region to become Macedonian, Alexander envisioned an empire where different civilizations could contribute their strengths to a common whole. It was an idea centuries ahead of its time. Not everyone approved. Many Macedonian veterans believed they had earned the right to rule over conquered peoples, not alongside them. They watched uneasily as Persian nobles entered the royal court, received positions of influence, and adopted roles once reserved for Macedonian companions. Alexander ignored the criticism. His vision reached even further. In 324 BC, at the city of Susa, he organized one of the most extraordinary ceremonies in ancient history, the mass weddings of Susa. In a grand celebration, Alexander himself married Statera II, the daughter of the late King Darius III, while also taking Parysatis, another Persian princess, as a wife. At the same ceremony, approximately 80 of his senior officers married women from the Persian aristocracy. Thousands of ordinary Macedonian soldiers who had already married local women received generous gifts from the king. The message was unmistakable. Alexander did not want two separate ruling classes. He wanted one, a new elite combining Macedonian leadership with Persian nobility. It was both a political strategy and a social experiment. Whether it could have succeeded remains one of history's great unanswered questions. Alexander's greatest instrument of cultural integration, however, was not marriage. It was cities. Throughout his campaigns, he founded or reorganized dozens of urban settlements, many named Alexandria in his honor. Some served primarily as military garrisons. Others became administrative capitals. Many occupied strategic locations along rivers, trade routes, or fertile plains. Each city acted as a bridge between cultures. Greek settlers introduced their language, architecture, philosophy, and political institutions. Local populations contributed their own customs, craftsmanship, religions, and traditions. Over time, entirely new communities emerged. These cities became engines of cultural exchange. Perhaps no city better represented Alexander's vision than Alexandria in Egypt. Although still under construction during his lifetime, its location was ideal. Positioned between the Mediterranean Sea and the Nile Delta, it quickly developed into one of the world's busiest ports. Within generations, Alexandria became a center of scholarship, commerce, and innovation. Its famous library sought to collect every written work known to humanity. Its museum attracted mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, philosophers, and engineers from across the Mediterranean and Near East. The city embodied the world Alexander hoped to create, a place where ideas traveled as freely as merchants. Trade flourished throughout the empire. For centuries, Persian roads had linked distant provinces. Alexander expanded and secured these routes while encouraging commerce between regions that had previously remained isolated from one another. Goods moved in unprecedented quantities. Grain from Egypt, wine from Greece, timber from Macedonia, textiles from Phoenicia, precious metals from Persia, spices from India, luxury goods from Central Asia. Merchants crossed borders that had once separated rival kingdoms. Economic prosperity followed. The introduction of standardized coinage across much of the empire further simplified commerce. Silver coins bearing Alexander's image or symbols circulated widely, making trade easier between distant provinces. For the first time, vast regions of Europe, Africa, and Asia became economically connected through a single imperial network. Ideas traveled alongside goods. Greek became the common language of administration, trade, and scholarship throughout much of the empire. It did not replace local languages, but it allowed people from different cultures to communicate more easily than ever before. This shared language would outlive Alexander himself by centuries. The spread of Greek thought transformed education across the ancient world. Students in Egypt studied Greek philosophy. Persian nobles learned Greek literature. Every discipline benefited from this unprecedented exchange of ideas. Historians call this remarkable blending of civilizations the Hellenistic Age. It became one of history's greatest periods of cultural creativity. Yet beneath this vision of unity, serious cracks had begun to appear. Many Macedonian soldiers increasingly felt like strangers within the empire they had conquered. Alexander adopted elements of Persian royal clothing. He surrounded himself with Persian advisors. He recruited thousands of Persian soldiers into the army, training them according to Macedonian methods. Some veterans quietly wondered whether their king still considered himself Macedonian at all. The tension reached a climax during an event known as the Mutiny at Opis. In 324 BC, near the Tigris River, Alexander announced that elderly and wounded Macedonian veterans would be sent home with generous rewards. Rather than welcoming the honor, many soldiers interpreted the decision as rejection. Rumors spread that Alexander intended to replace them with Persians. Anger exploded throughout the camp. Some soldiers openly shouted insults. Others demanded to be discharged immediately. For perhaps the first time in his career, Alexander faced open rebellion from the very men who had conquered the world beside him. His response was dramatic. Enraged, he arrested and executed several of the ringleaders before delivering one of the most famous speeches of antiquity. He reminded the soldiers what Macedonia had been before Philip II. A poor, vulnerable kingdom constantly threatened by stronger neighbors. He reminded them that together they had defeated Persia, accumulated unimaginable wealth, and achieved immortal fame. Everything they possessed, he argued, had been earned through their shared victories. Then, in a stunning gesture, Alexander dismissed the entire Macedonian army. He declared that if they wished to leave, they could return home while he continued ruling with his new Persian subjects. The soldiers were stunned. Almost immediately, regret replaced anger. Delegations begged the king's forgiveness. Alexander accepted. In a magnificent ceremony of reconciliation, Macedonians and Persians feasted together, symbolizing the unity he continued to pursue despite growing resistance. For a brief moment, his vision appeared possible once again. Yet, Alexander's ambitions still extended beyond the empire he already possessed. Even after nearly a decade of constant campaigning, he was planning new expeditions. Arabia, perhaps Carthage, possibly even the Western Mediterranean. Shipyards expanded. Exploratory missions were organized. Maps were studied. The king who had conquered the greatest empire in history had no intention of stopping. He was only 32 years old. To those around him, it seemed as though nothing could prevent Alexander from reshaping the entire known world. But history often turns not through grand battles, nor through mighty armies, but through moments no one can foresee. In the summer of 323 BC, Alexander returned to the city of Babylon. There, surrounded by unimaginable wealth, preparing the next phase of his empire. The greatest conqueror the ancient world had ever known fell suddenly ill. Within days, everything changed. By the spring of 323 BC, Alexander had accomplished more in 13 years than most rulers could hope to achieve in a lifetime. He had overthrown the Persian Empire, founded cities across 3 continents, marched farther east than any Greek army before him, created the largest empire the world had ever seen. And yet, for Alexander, it was still not enough. Returning from the eastern campaigns, he chose Babylon as the administrative heart of his empire. Few cities were better suited for the role. Located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Babylon stood at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Merchants arrived daily from distant lands. Engineers worked on new harbors and canals. Royal officials came from every corner of the empire, bringing tribute, reports, and requests for the king's judgment. The city buzzed with activity. Alexander had no intention of settling into a quiet life as emperor. His attention had already shifted toward new horizons. He ordered extensive preparations for an invasion of Arabia, whose wealthy trading kingdoms controlled valuable routes carrying frankincense, myrrh, spices, and luxury goods across the ancient world. Massive fleets were being assembled along the Euphrates. Harbors were expanded. Thousands of sailors were recruited. Some ancient sources even suggest that Alexander envisioned campaigns far beyond Arabia, perhaps against Carthage, perhaps into the Western Mediterranean. Some later writers imagined invasions of Italy, or even lands beyond. Modern historians remain cautious about these claims, as many originate from later traditions rather than contemporary evidence. What is beyond dispute is that Alexander was planning further expansion. The greatest conqueror in history still believed there were new worlds to reach. But as preparations continued, unsettling signs began to appear. Ancient historians recorded numerous omens that seemed to foreshadow disaster. A flock of ravens reportedly fought in the sky above Babylon before falling dead at Alexander's feet. A strange man was said to have entered the royal palace and seated himself upon Alexander's throne while wearing the king's robes and crown. Babylonian priests warned that entering the city at that particular time would bring misfortune. Whether these stories reflect genuine events, later embellishment, or the ancient tendency to interpret history through supernatural signs, they reveal something important. After Alexander's death, many believed the gods themselves had foretold what was about to happen. Alexander ignored every warning. He had survived countless battles. He had crossed deserts and mountains. He had faced charging elephants, assassins, and armies many times larger than his own. Why should he fear an omen? During the final weeks of his life, Alexander remained fully occupied with matters of state. He met ambassadors from distant kingdoms, reviewed military plans, inspected naval preparations, discussed exploration of the Persian Gulf, organized new administrative reforms for the empire. Nothing suggested that his extraordinary career was nearing its end. Then, sometime in early June 323 BC, after attending a banquet celebrating one of his companions, Alexander suddenly fell ill. The exact sequence of events varies depending on the ancient source. According to several accounts, he developed a fever after drinking heavily during the festivities. Others suggest the illness began more gradually over several days. At first, neither Alexander nor his companions appeared overly concerned. The king had endured wounds, exhaustion, and illness before. Surely this would pass as well. It did not. The fever worsened. Day by day, Alexander grew weaker. Still, he continued issuing military orders from his bed whenever strength allowed. His generals waited anxiously outside his chambers while physicians searched desperately for a cure. Nothing worked. As news spread through the army, anxiety turned to panic. For nearly 13 years, Alexander had seemed invincible. Many soldiers could scarcely imagine a world without him. Eventually, rumors began circulating that the king had already died and that his commanders were hiding the truth. To calm the growing unrest, Alexander's attendants carried him to a place where his soldiers could see him. One by one, thousands of Macedonian veterans quietly filed past the bed of the man they had followed across 3 continents. Ancient historians describe a deeply moving scene. Unable to speak because of his illness, Alexander simply raised his hand in silent acknowledgement as his soldiers passed. Many wept openly. These were men who had marched beside him through impossible hardships, who had fought countless battles under his command, who had watched him repeatedly risk his own life at the front of every charge. Now, for the first time, there was nothing he could do. As Alexander's condition deteriorated, the question everyone feared could no longer be avoided. Who would inherit the empire? His generals gathered around his bedside. According to the most famous tradition, one of them asked, "To whom do you leave your kingdom?" Alexander whispered, "To the strongest." Those 3 words have echoed through history ever since. Yet not every ancient source records the exchange. Some historians suggest Alexander instead handed his royal signet ring to Perdiccas, one of his senior commanders, perhaps indicating that he should serve as regent until an heir could be chosen. Others argue the famous phrase may have been remembered, or invented, after later civil wars made it seem almost prophetic. The truth remains uncertain. What is certain is that Alexander left behind no clear adult successor. His wife Roxana was pregnant, but had not yet given birth. His half-brother Philip Aridaeus possessed royal blood, but suffered from significant intellectual disabilities that made independent rule unlikely. Neither option offered the strong leadership necessary to govern the largest empire in history. On either June 10th or June 11th, 323 BC, depending on the calendar used, Alexander died in Babylon. He was 32 years old. His reign had lasted barely 13 years. His empire stretched across roughly 2 million square miles. News of his death spread with astonishing speed. Throughout the empire, disbelief gave way to uncertainty. In Greece, some cities immediately considered rebellion. In Asia, provincial governors questioned whom they should obey. In Babylon itself, Alexander's generals stared at one another across the royal palace. Each commanded loyal troops. Each possessed enormous influence. Each believed he understood how the empire should be governed. None intended to surrender power easily. Almost immediately, rumors began surrounding the king's death. Had he died from malaria, a disease common in the marshes around Babylon? Typhoid fever? Pneumonia? Complications from old battle wounds? Exhaustion after years of relentless campaigning? Or had someone poisoned him? The poisoning theory has fascinated people for more than 2,000 years. Ancient writers accused various suspects, disgruntled nobles, political rivals, members of the royal court, even some of Alexander's closest companions. However, most modern historians and medical researchers consider deliberate poisoning unlikely. The illness described by the ancient sources appears to have progressed over many days, unlike the fast-acting poisons known in antiquity. Many scholars instead favor natural causes, though the exact diagnosis remains impossible to determine with certainty. The mystery continues to inspire debate. Alexander's body became almost as legendary as his life. According to tradition, it was embalmed using Egyptian techniques before being placed inside an elaborate golden coffin. Plans were made to return him to Macedonia for burial beside his ancestors. The journey never reached its intended destination. As the magnificent funeral procession slowly traveled west, one of Alexander's former generals, Ptolemy, intercepted it. Recognizing both the symbolic and political importance of possessing the conqueror's remains, Ptolemy diverted the procession to Egypt. Alexander's body was eventually placed in a grand tomb at Alexandria, the city he himself had founded. For centuries, rulers and travelers journeyed there to pay their respects. Even the Roman Emperor Julius Caesar is believed to have visited the tomb. Eventually, however, its exact location was lost to history. One of archaeology's greatest mysteries remains unsolved. Where does Alexander the Great rest today? Perhaps somewhere beneath the modern streets of Alexandria, waiting to be rediscovered. Yet the greatest mystery Alexander left behind was not his tomb. It was his empire. He had conquered the world through the force of one extraordinary personality, but no institutions existed strong enough to replace him. No universally accepted heir, no constitution, no peaceful system of succession, only ambitious generals, powerful armies, and an empire too vast for any one man to control. Within days of Alexander's death, negotiations gave way to suspicion. Suspicion gave way to rivalry. Rivalry would soon become war. The empire that had taken 13 years to build would begin to fracture almost immediately. Alexander had united the known world. His successors were about to tear it apart. When Alexander the Great died in Babylon in 323 BC, the largest empire the world had ever known suddenly had no master. From Greece to India, governors waited for instructions that never came. Generals eyed one another with growing suspicion. Entire armies wondered whom they now served. The man who had united 3 continents through the force of his own personality had left behind no clear plan for what should happen next. The empire did not collapse in a single day. At first, Alexander's closest companions attempted to preserve the illusion of unity. After tense negotiations in Babylon, a compromise was reached. Alexander's half-brother, Philip III Aridaeus, would become king despite his limited ability to rule independently. If Alexander's unborn child proved to be a son, he too would become king after his birth. Months later, Roxana gave birth to a boy. He was named Alexander IV. On paper, the empire now had 2 kings. In reality, it had none. Real authority rested with the men who commanded the armies. These powerful generals became known as the Diadochi, meaning the successors. Each had fought beside Alexander for years. Each had helped build the empire, and each believed he deserved a greater share of its power. Among the most influential were Perdiccas, appointed as regent and guardian of the royal family; Ptolemy, who controlled wealthy Egypt; Seleucus, an experienced commander destined to rule the East; Antigonus Monophthalmus, known as the One-Eyed, perhaps the most ambitious of them all; Lysimachus, who governed Thrace; and Cassander, the son of one of Philip II's most trusted officers. At first, they claimed to govern in the names of the 2 kings. Behind closed doors, however, they prepared for war. The first conflict erupted almost immediately. Perdiccas attempted to maintain the unity of Alexander's empire by keeping the satraps loyal to the central government in Babylon. Many governors had no intention of surrendering their newfound independence. The greatest challenge came from Egypt. Its governor, Ptolemy, understood something that many others did not. Holding Alexander's body carried immense symbolic power. When Ptolemy diverted the king's magnificent funeral procession to Egypt, he was making more than a political statement. He was presenting himself as the guardian of Alexander's legacy. Perdiccas could not ignore such an open challenge. In 321 BC, he led an invasion of Egypt. The campaign ended in disaster. Attempting to cross the Nile River, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of Macedonian soldiers drowned in the powerful currents. Morale collapsed. Enraged officers blamed Perdiccas for the catastrophe. Before the campaign could continue, several of his own commanders entered his tent and murdered him. The first regent of Alexander's empire had fallen. His death marked the true beginning of the Wars of the Successors. Over the next 40 years, the ancient world became a battlefield. Former friends became bitter enemies. Alliances shifted constantly. Victories proved temporary. No sooner had one general gained the advantage than another coalition formed against him. Entire kingdoms changed hands again and again. Among the successors, one figure seemed closest to reuniting Alexander's empire: Antigonus Monophthalmus. Known simply as Antigonus the One-Eyed, he proved to be an extraordinary military commander. Through a series of brilliant campaigns, he gradually expanded his territory until he controlled much of Asia Minor, Syria, and large portions of the former Persian Empire. His growing power alarmed every other successor. If Antigonus succeeded, Alexander's empire might once again be united under a single ruler. His rivals refused to allow that possibility. In 301 BC, they assembled a grand coalition against him. The decisive confrontation came at the Battle of Ipsus in central Anatolia. It became one of the largest battles fought after Alexander's death. Once again, Macedonian phalanxes advanced across the battlefield. Companion-style cavalry charged. War elephants, acquired from eastern kingdoms, played a decisive role. But this time, Macedonians fought Macedonians. The battle ended with Antigonus dead upon the battlefield at nearly 80 years of age. His dream of reuniting Alexander's empire died with him. After Ipsus, the possibility of restoring a single empire became increasingly remote. Instead, three major kingdoms gradually emerged from the chaos. The first was Ptolemaic Egypt. Under Ptolemy, the first Soter, Egypt became one of the richest and most stable states of the Hellenistic world. Unlike many other successors, Ptolemy avoided reckless expansion. He focused on strengthening Egypt itself. Alexandria flourished under his rule. The Great Library expanded. The famous museum attracted scholars from across the known world. Trade flowing through the Nile made Egypt immensely wealthy. The Ptolemaic dynasty would endure for nearly 3 centuries. Its final ruler would become one of history's most famous queens, Cleopatra VII. The second great kingdom belonged to Seleucus I Nicator. Stretching from Syria deep into Mesopotamia and Persia, the Seleucid Empire became the largest of the successor states. Its territory encompassed an astonishing variety of peoples and cultures. Greeks settled newly founded cities. Persian traditions remained influential. Babylonian scholarship continued to thrive. Trade reached as far as India. Although governing such an enormous realm proved difficult, the Seleucid Empire became a vital bridge connecting east and west. The third major kingdom emerged in Macedon itself. After years of struggle, the descendants of Antigonus established the Antigonid dynasty, ruling the homeland from which Alexander's conquests had begun. Though far smaller than Alexander's empire, Macedon remained an important power in the Greek world for generations. Together, these three kingdoms dominated the eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Yet they were not alone. Smaller Hellenistic states appeared throughout the former empire. The Kingdom of Pergamon in Asia Minor, the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom in Central Asia, the Indo-Greek kingdoms that ruled parts of modern Afghanistan and northern India. Even far from the Mediterranean, Greek language and culture continued to flourish in places Alexander himself had conquered. Meanwhile, the royal family that might have preserved Alexander's dynasty slowly disappeared. One by one, potential heirs were eliminated. Alexander's mother, Olympias, became entangled in the struggles for power and was eventually executed. Philip III Aridaeus was murdered. Roxana and the young Alexander IV were imprisoned before being secretly killed on the orders of Cassander around 309 BC. With the death of Alexander's son, the Argead dynasty, the royal house that had ruled Macedon for centuries, came to an end. No legitimate heir remained. The empire now belonged entirely to the successors. Yet, despite the endless wars, something remarkable happened. The political unity Alexander had created disappeared. The cultural unity endured. Throughout the Hellenistic kingdoms, Greek became the language of government, commerce, diplomacy, and scholarship. Cities founded by Alexander and his successors became centers of learning. Philosophers taught in gymnasiums from Egypt to Central Asia. Artists blended Greek styles with Egyptian, Persian, and local traditions. Astronomers built upon Babylonian observations. Doctors exchanged medical knowledge across continents. Merchants carried goods farther than ever before. Ideas ignored political borders. Even when kings fought, civilization continued to spread. Ironically, the empire may have become more influential after its political collapse than while it remained united. For nearly 3 centuries, the Hellenistic kingdoms shaped the ancient world. Then, another power began rising in the West, a republic built not by kings, but by citizens and senators. Rome. One by one, the Hellenistic kingdoms fell beneath Roman expansion. Macedon was conquered. The Seleucid Empire fragmented before eventually disappearing. Finally, in 30 BC, after the deaths of Cleopatra VII and Mark Antony, Egypt became a Roman province. The last great successor kingdom had fallen. Politically, Alexander's empire was gone forever. But history would remember it for something far greater than its borders. Because although the empire had shattered, its legacy had only just begun.